What is the oldest racing franchise still releasing new entries today? Some of you may immediately think of Need for Speed or Gran Turismo, but for me, the answer has to be Test Drive. The series that we now recognize as one of the biggest pioneers of open-world MMO racing games actually began with a different reputation. Originally known for helping popularize the simulation style of racing games all the way back in the 80s, so how did Test Drive reach this point? Because the Unlimited series, as beloved as it is, represents only a fraction of the Test Drive legacy. The franchise's lifespan stretches far beyond Oahu, Ibiza, or Hong Kong, and to understand how it became the symbol of open-world racing and luxury, we need to go back. Way back to where it all began. In 1987, the very first Test Drive hit the scene, developed by Distinctive Software. The concept was simple but ambitious, being a realistic driving experience into the homes of everyday consumers, letting them feel the thrill of high-end sports cars without ever touching the real thing, hence the name Test Drive.
Now by today's standards, these games are a little bit primitive, but back then they were really impressive, especially when compared to the competition. Test Drive even broke new grounds by featuring multiple car brands in a single game, something very rare to be seen at that time.
The premise was straightforward. Pick a car, drive from point A to point B, and survive the hazards of traffic and treacherous mountain roads. The sequel, Test Drive 2 The Duel, raised the stakes by introducing a rival opponent and police chases, adding tension and dynamicism to the formula. And then came Test Drive 3, which shifted into full 3D. This leap removed many of the limitations of the earlier titles, offering multiple routes, verticality, and even jumps. The trilogy ran for around 4 years back-to-back from 1987 to 1990, each entry pushing video game development forward in its own way. But behind the scenes, things were changing. Distinctive Software only developed the first 2 titles before being acquired by EA, where they would go on to create the Need for Speed. The third game, meanwhile, was handled directly by Accolade. That shift may explain some of its differences, the move from 2D to 3D, the non-linear design, and the very limited port for Test Drive 3. If you are interested in trying these out, I would just recommend getting a DOS emulator like DOSBox, not necessarily because they're the best, but for the convenience. After the trilogy, the series would enter a pretty long hiatus. With their original developer now acquired and turned into EA Canada, Accolade had the choice between developing the games themselves or handing over the development to another development studio. These games were handed over to the studio known as the Pitbull Syndicate, a newly founded studio established in the year 1996. They were given the rights to develop the Test Drive games, with their first title being a very clear cut where its inspiration comes from. Test Drive 4 was, in many ways, the closest thing the classic Need for Speed titles ever had to a direct competitor. By 1997, Need for Speed 2 had just hit the market, giving Test Drive some time to iterate and refine its own ideas. And what emerged was a game that plays and feels like a 90s arcade racer. You had sprint races across 6 tracks spanning diverse environments, countryside roads, mountain passes, and bustling city streets. The car roster featured 14 licensed sports and muscle cars from the era, including icons like the Dodge Viper, which would go on to become the series' icon, alongside the Camaro SS, Jaguar XJ220, TVR Cerbera, Nissan 300ZX, and a lineup heavily skewed towards American muscle. European and Japanese cars were present, but far fewer in number. And as far as I'm aware, there's no upgrade system here, meaning some cars were simply better than others by default, thanks to raw performance or handling. More vehicles could be unlocked through the game's championship mode, but things got brutal pretty quickly. The difficulty is there to remind you of what period this is made from. Opponents relied on aggressive rubber banding. Even after a crash, they could catch up within seconds. Collisions were harshly penalized too. Your car would spin endlessly, and hitting traffic outright disabled your controls until the crash animation finished. Sometimes you'd just sit there staring at your upside down car for 3 long seconds before the game resets you. It demanded practice, whether mastering from the car or memorizing the track and traffic spawn points. That said, the championship structure was surprisingly inventive for its time. Around 5 different cups were available, each with unique rules. Some used traditional point scoring, others ranked players by total time, and one even required a first place finish to advance. By modern standards, the repetition stands out, since the same tracks are recycled between cups, often doubled with reverse layouts, but in 1997, this was solid content. And the result? Test Drive 4 sold nearly 1 million copies within its first year, cementing itself as one of the PlayStation's biggest racing hits. So obviously, the sequel was made as a response very quickly in just a year, and it's easily an improvement in almost every aspect. The physics were tighter, the handling more refined, and the roster expanded with better looking models. Tracks were more varied, balancing was improved, and for the first time, proper circuit races were introduced alongside the classic sprints. In many ways, it felt like the definitive edition of what Test Drive 4 should have been. Software piracy? Absolute war criminal, get your ass over here! The car list grew to 37 vehicles, 28 cars based on actual existing models ranging from exotic supercars to American muscle, 4 police cars for the pursuit mode, and 5 fictional cars as unlockables, with sharper texture and more details than before. The environment stretched across multiple regions, offering countryside roads, cityscapes, and mountain passes that gave the game a sense of scale and variety. Championships were fleshed out, adding more structure to progression, and the overall package felt far more complete than its predecessor. But despite all these improvements, Test Drive 5 struggled to stand out in 1998. And why is that, you may ask? Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit had just landed and it was a juggernaut. EA's title refined the formula to the point of dominating the market. Compared to that, Test Drive 5 felt like it was catching up, and this exposed flaws that had been easier to overlook in Test Drive 4. The AI's aggressive rubber banding, the sometimes clunky collision system. To me, this says less about the game itself and more about the era it was released in. The late 90s racing scene was evolving at breakneck speed, that even a solid improvement could feel outdated within a year. Test Drive 5 wasn't a bad game, it was simply outpaced by the rapid innovation happening all around it. It may explain the drastic change in Test Drive 6, as the game sort of went away from the super simplistic arcade-style progression. In its place came a vertical career system built around car ownership, performance tiers, upgrades, and even an economy fueled by betting. Starting at Tier 1 with slower cars, gradually climbing to Tier 4 with the supercars. To move up, you had to earn money through championships and events, and if you're confident enough, you could gamble your life savings away. Betting added risk and reward. Finish below second place and you'd be in a net negative, but nail your races and it becomes a shortcut to faster earnings. The catch, however, was the betting wasn't optional. Even single races and championships required minimum wager for entry, meaning that if you ever ran out of cash, you'd be forced to grind side content like time trials or pursuit events just to get back on track. It's not bad, but the time trials can be pretty lame with how little the rewards are compared to the time required. Pursuits, meanwhile, can be pretty fun under most circumstances. For the first time in the trilogy, upgrades were introduced, though in a very basic form, with limited tuning options. On paper, this was a welcomed addition, helping address issues like the series' notorious understeer, but the balancing was strange. Fully upgrading tires and suspension often made cars twitchy and borderline uncontrollable, becoming a design trap that punished players for investing in improvements. The tracks, at least, were more ambitious. Multiple route options added variety, and in many cases, the fastest path depended on your car's strengths. Some routes even took you through unusual shortcuts, making races feel more dynamic than before. Unfortunately, the cars themselves were another story. For reasons that remain unclear, the models took a nosedive in quality.
This is a pile of dog shit.
The downgrade was so severe that, without context, you might mistake these models for assets ripped from a budget Java racing game. It's kind of puzzling since there's around 40 cars, not that much compared to what was in TD5, with most of them cars returning here. So did they just trash the old models?
But say all you want about the car models here. At least the Prowler is usable in here. I'm looking at you, Gran Turismo 4.
Outside of the career mode, content was sparse. Quick Race was the only other option, and while the progression system and track designs showed ambition, the overall tone of the game felt unfocused. The critical reception reflected this, with some praising the changes and others dismissing them outright. The poor car models certainly didn't help convince players of the game's quality, and for once, I find myself agreeing with the critics. Even though I found this a lot more enjoyable than the previous games, the uneven result was likely tied to chaos chaos behind the scenes. Around this time, Accolade was acquired by Infogrames, leading to restructuring and the merger into Infogrames North America. Combine that with an unusual release schedule that forces developers to rush, and the cracks become easier to understand. And things only get messier when you look at the spin-off series they were developing alongside this trilogy. The Off-Road series is a spin-off alternative that features more of a wild side of the automotive industry. These were created alongside Test Drive 4 to really capitalize on the momentum.
But as we'll soon see, this created more problems than it solved, stretching the franchise quite thin and exposing cracks in the process.
Developed in parallel with Test Drive 4, it was clearly designed to ride the momentum built by the mainline series. At first glance, it seemed like a smart move, expanding the brand into dirt tracks, rugged terrain, and vehicles built for chaos rather than polish, which should provide its own type of variety and tackle a completely different corner of the market. The first entry in the off-road spin-off was handled to Elite Systems, a studio with roots going back to 1984. While it carried some of the energy of Test Drive 4, this game was stripped down even further, offering a bare-bones experience. The roster of vehicles was extremely tiny, and a handful of off-road circuits were recycled across championships with only slight variations in rotation. Progression was simple: win cups either in free mixed championships or in events restricted to certain cars, but with so few vehicles available, the options felt limited, and the sense of variety was almost non-existent. Driving itself was strange. The game attempted to simulate physics, but the result was janky and inconsistent. Cars felt glued to the ground, lacking the bounce and unpredictability you'd expect from off-road racing. The upside was the speed it has to offer. Races felt fast and thrilling, especially on the bumpy tracks, but this came at a cost. The draw distance was painfully short, forcing players to rely on the minimap, which never truly compensated for the lack of visibility. Combine that with ruthless AI that punishes even the smallest of mistakes, and the experience quickly turns frustrating. In the end, Test Drive Off-Road 1 was a curious experiment, fast, simple, and occasionally fun, but ultimately too shallow and rough around the edges to stand alongside the mainline series. It hinted at potential, but also exposed the risks of simply chasing maximum exposure. The second off-road game arrived just a year later, once again developed by Pitbull Syndicate and crucially, right alongside Test Drive 5. You can probably imagine the kind of crunch culture that implies. Two major releases in the same year, following directly on the heels of their last project. You can outright feel just how rushed the game is through the screen, like there's only a very limited amount of gameplay, with way more cars available to play around with. An overhauled career mode, which is weird when the championship has barely been increased, still limiting what car you can actually use in the process, but now with an economy system in place. On paper, Off-Road 2 expanded the formula. There were more cars to choose from, a career mode overhaul, and even an economy system layered into progression. But strangely, the championships themselves barely grew. The real problem, though, was balance. For reasons that remain baffling, the developers abandoned circuit layouts entirely in favor of sprint races. This did allow for some creative track design, steep climbs, wild verticality, and scenic routes that looked impressive. But the AI opponents, they were absurdly fast, especially on the hills. It felt less like racing and more like chasing opponents who had rockets strapped on their cars. And without any upgrade system in place, the game's design could outright punish you. Pick the wrong starter car and you'll have some really tough time, unable to keep pace no matter how well you drive. What should have been a bigger, bolder sequel ended up feeling rushed, unbalanced, and frustrating. Off-Road 3, on the other hand, took many of the ideas introduced in Test Drive 6 and reworked them into its own mechanics and gimmicks. Development was now handled by Infogrames North America, and that shift explains a lot of the design choices we see here. The career mode closely mirrors Test Drive 6's division-style championships, but without performance tier restrictions. That means every car is usable across all championships, giving players far more freedom. The upgrade system is also a step up from Test Drive 6. Each upgrade simultaneously boosts one stat while reducing another, forcing players to think strategically. Depending on the track or championship, It's often smarter to focus on suspension or handling rather than raw engine power. In fact, with the right setup, you could dominate races without ever touching the engine upgrades. They also introduced advanced driving mechanics for the game that could really help out in very specific scenarios, most of which will require some mastery to use at the best time. But they weren't flawless. Faster cars with low suspension setups could become twitchy nightmares, bouncing unpredictably over rough terrain. Certain parts exist to balance this out, but upgrades being tied to individual cars makes mid-career vehicle swaps costly and inconvenient. Off-Road 3 was a steep improvement over its predecessors. The mix of circuits and sprint races, combined with track designs that lean heavily into verticality, created genuinely engaging gameplay. Races weren't just about speed, they were about choosing the right terrain, finding hidden shortcuts, and learning how to climb steep mountains efficiently. That variety gave the game a rewarding sense of discovery.
But the arcade chapter of Test Drive wasn't just done yet. There were still 2 major games left to come out, somehow even reaching higher grounds than the previous generation.
The final entry in the Off-Road series carried the title Wide Open, and the name really says it all. Developed by none other than Angel Studios, the team behind Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run, later rebranded as Rockstar San Diego. This game arrived just a year after their breakout hits, and you can feel their fingerprints all over it. Structurally, Wide Open's career resembles Off-Road 3 with division-based championships, no car restrictions, and a familiar economy and reward system. But this time, upgrades were gone, and the car roster was trimmed down. Instead, each vehicle came with 4 preset variations, each gaining performance boosts with visual changes, a system that felt very much in line with early Midnight Club design. Where Wide Open truly shines is in its gameplay loop. This is, in essence, Midnight Club 2 but with an off-road setting. The title doesn't exaggerate, the maps are wide open, and the checkpoint-based events encourage creativity. Your success depends entirely on how you reach the next checkpoint. Steep cliffs, sharp ledges, rugged terrain. If cutting across them is faster, then go for it. The game rewards map knowledge, experimentation, and bold shortcuts. Event variety is solid. Sprints, circuits, and the iconic freeform checkpoint races. Even the handling and physics feel almost identical to Midnight Club, right down to the aggressive AI behavior, so expect to get pit maneuvered a lot if you're not careful. Early races might feel relaxed, but the difficulty ramps up fast. With no upgrade system to lean on, you'll need skill, persistence, and a bit of grit to push through, much like Midnight Club 2. And hey, if you want to see Savo catch ridiculous airtime in a Ford Bronco, this game delivers that in spades. But jokes aside, Wide Open stands out as the best of the arcade-era test drive titles, which isn't surprising given Angel Studios' pedigree. It's a game that took the strengths of its developers and applied them to the test drive brand, leaving behind a high-energy, open-world racer that still feels way ahead of its time.
Just a year after Wide Open, Pitbull Syndicate will release one more final game. Its title, the gloriously over-the-top TD Overdrive Brotherhood of Speed, or as I like to call it, the Brotherhood of Steel.
Originally, it was supposed to just be called Test Drive Underground, but after Infogrames rebranded itself as Atari SA, the name was changed, making this one of the first titles of the Atari Revival era. It surprisingly only had a few bells and whistles you'd expect from a tuner-style street racer of the time. The most it seems to take is with the menu aesthetics, where most of the usual things like heavy visual customization are completely absent. But there is a full story mode as its career. Players stepped into the shoes of Dennis Black, a washed-up drag racer from San Francisco who gets pulled into an exclusive league of wealthy, high-stakes street racers by Donald Clark, tasked to race across several events around massive maps set in San Francisco, Tokyo, London, and Monte Carlo. Structurally, it resembled Need for Speed Underground, though the checkpoint system kept it more rigid than the freeform chaos of Midnight Club. You can see the DNA of TDU's cast in these characters. The lot of them are written to some absurd degree that the writing reaches some high comedy levels.
For me, there is no next time. Seppuku is the only way! What?
It's the kind of writing quality anyone would expect from a Yakuza Substory, but most importantly, they work as a foil to Dennis' straight man personality. Their silliness shouldn't distract you from what these guys are ultimately about. They're rich, cocky, but most importantly, fast. The AI reflected that too, with strange rubber banding in the form of sudden speed bursts, then oddly generous moments where they'd slow down and wait if you crashed. Convenient since there was no difficulty option, and the crash physics are hilariously over the top. But since the AI will often play nice, the real challenge came from the timer. Unless you hit ramps scattered across the map to earn precious extra seconds. The cops can also bust you, but it's not really that different from Pitbull's previous version of what busted means. Most of the time, we're only tasked to finish in the top 3. A few events will require absolute victory, but they're more of a special event like boss duels or drag race tournaments. Additionally, Clark and the other rivals will have different reactions depending on whether you finish first, second, or third.
Can't win 'em all, Black. And some of us can't win any. Unstoppable indeed. I never doubted you.
You go, boy. Hey, where are you staying?
And if you straight up fail to qualify,
At last. Don't start. Apparently you forgot to do just that.
additionally, there are some races that let you continue despite losing a race, like the pink slip duels. The game will straight up remove the used car afterwards, so be wary of that, if you don't want to lose your favorite cars. Oh no, the car is actually gone, so the fact wasn't correct. The thing is though, since we're dealing with Pitbull Syndicate, the whole fail condition and even busted effect changes inconsistently. Sometimes getting busted means you get a slap on the wrist, other times it's instant game over. Wait, what? Now it actually cancels the race for me? It didn't do it back then? Car progression was also extremely linear. There was no economy system since Dennis is pretty much broke, so Clark funded his rides. You start off with a Hemi Cuda and a Toyota Supra, gradually unlocking classics like the AC Cobra, Mustang, and more. Boss races introduced pink slip wagers, while clearing each region chapter unlocked new rivals and their cars. Customization was limited to only visuals, with color and part options, but no performance tuning. They don't even have body kits or intense visual customization, which would have been expected. Even if the gameplay loop grew repetitive, the writing should carry enough intrigue to keep players invested. Between Dennis's banter with rivals and the mystery surrounding Clark's motives, like why hire a washed-up drag racer, where his funding came from, and what's up with the Viper GTSR at the center of attention, the story had just enough hooks of mysteries to pull you through. For me, this stands as Pitbull Syndicate's best work, a fascinating evolution from their start with Test Drive 4. Seeing how much attention to detail is present here, you can hear the radio coming from any nearby traffic car, and the fact they got a ton of dialogues depending on where you place that aren't just copy and pasted. Even if it's superficial and the core gameplay can be pretty mid, especially with the long and boring circuit events, nothing else would top it, as the last game they produced, at least under the Pitbull Syndicate name, they would rebrand as Midway Studios Newcastle after, where they would produce 2 more games before disappearing due to Midway's collapse.
Stop. How do you say it? Harshing the vibe, dude.
You know, whenever I find a random Twitch user that is being annoying, I'm just gonna tell them that. Stop harshing the vibe, dude. After this point on, the series wouldn't really have much of an ongoing series they could call as a mainline until the Unlimited games finally come around. Instead, the series sort of went into this weird phase sometime in the late 90s to 2000s, where the Test Drive name gets thrown around and passed between a ton of developers to make spin-off titles that would tackle one-time unique titles with specific disciplines, or in the case of some games, just so they can publish a game in certain regions with faster sales, like what happened to V-Rally 2 or the Test Drive Rally game, which can be traced to its real name, Michelin Rally Masters Race of Champions. A couple of Game Boy Color exclusive titles like Test Drive Cycles and Test Drive 2001. Sometimes you do get some proper gems out of the spin-offs, like with Test Drive Le Mans, one of the rare attempts made to simulate the 24-hour Le Mans endurance races back in the 2000s, which I've already covered a while back, while main development was handled by Infogrames Melbourne. I've only had experience with the main Dreamcast version specifically. Obviously, the game features the Le Mans circuit alongside 9 other officially approved tracks and 40 cars from the GT and prototype classes. Technically though, the game is very impressive for its time, featuring a simulated time system to really immerse you to the endurance race experience, on top of the weather and surface effects that could change the situation dynamically. Most of the gameplay is pretty straightforward and in line with expectations, but then you have the Le Mans event, the crowning jewel of the game, where players can have the endurance simulation in different cycles, so you can test it out for 10 to 30 minutes, or truly push it to 1, 6, or even a full-blown 24-hour race. It is worth checking every game mode here for the unlockable cars. For a game released in the year 2000, This is pretty impressive. This was a year before Gran Turismo 3 would release too, so having a game introduce a full-on 24-hour endurance event was pretty revolutionary. The fact they can even change things around for the individual game modes in the options menu was pretty unheard of. They did try again way later to create a sim racing experience, but instead of latching onto the Le Mans branding, this time they went towards Ferrari, because Ferraris are interesting, I assume. This was released way later in 2012, a bit after the launch of TDU2, developed by Slightly Mad Studios, also developers of Need for Speed Shift and the Project Card titles. With that information, it's very clear just how much of NFS Shift 2 would carry over onto this title, including the physics and handling, so if you like Shift 2, you'd like this game as well. The purpose of the game, however, was mainly to celebrate Ferrari's 65th birthday, so to fit the idea, the main campaign is set up to showcase the history and advancement of Ferrari throughout the decades, featuring a lot of the classics from 1947 to 1973 to the modern era of 2011, from road cars to race cars and many disciplines from Formula 1 to GT racing. It's great if you like simcades and Ferraris, but otherwise, it's just a solid game.
But there's still one test drive game that I haven't touched on yet. One heavily regarded as the better of the test drive games, focused more on the brutal, aggressive side of racing.
Test Drive Eve of Destruction was one of the strangest spin-offs in the franchise, a polar opposite of what you expect from the usual test drive experience. Instead of luxury sports cars or high-performance off-road machines, this game threw players straight into the world of Demolition Derby. Forget exotic imports, here you're driving cheap, makeshift cars cobbled together from junkyard scraps. Released in 2004 by Monster Games, it stood out as a bizarre but fascinating experiment. Unlike most test drive titles, Eve of Destruction featured no licensed vehicles whatsoever. Progression revolved around climbing the ranks through Eves, unlocking new events, features, more junkyard cars, and what feels like an extremely southern experience. The junkyard rotates stock daily, but you can skip this by going in and out of the garage. Cars could be traded in to lower the price of new ones, but the most important stats are speed and durability, essential for surviving the brutal mix of racing and destruction. Although it is often best to have at least 2 cars available to cover both sides of challenges, events were varied and creative. Beyond standard circuit races, tracks introduced twists like split routes, mandatory direction changes each lap, sumo-style battles, and last man standing arenas. I personally dig how they managed to squeeze sprint events as optimal warm-ups, offering reputation boosts before the main competitions. While you could skip certain events, the first and last of each eve were mandatory, ensuring a steady climb through the ranks. As your reputation grew, new features unlocked across the town, time trials for extra cash, more rivals to challenge, and a garage where you could upgrade stats of individual cars or even manually paint them with this system. Since it's Destruction Derby though, you can go for being the most destructive driver overall, even if it wouldn't help much besides wringing a bit more cash and reputation by the end of the eve. But attachment to any single car is risky. Vehicles accumulate permanent damage over time, gradually lowering their maximal health until replacements become inevitable. This added a layer of strategy through balancing repairs, upgrades, and junkyard purchases to stay competitive. Every 10 ranks, the game even rewarded players with documentary-style snippets about real Demolition Derby culture in the early 2000s, grounding the chaos in authentic motorsport history. The open world hub was an interesting idea, but ultimately underwhelming. With no traffic or collectibles, fast travel was often the better option, and progression early on feels painfully slow, with upgrades locked behind 20 ranks of grind. Still, despite its flaws, Eve of Destruction delivered a unique take on racing. It didn't catch everything on fire, but it got one of them. It may not have been as bombastic as Flat Out or later games like Trail Out or Wreckfest, but it carved out its own niche, at least as something that dared to break away from Test Drive's usual identity. And with Eve of Destruction, the Test Drive name had officially gone full circle from luxury sports cars to Demolition Derby chaos. Ooh! 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 Let's go! It was a bizarre but memorable detour. That was until 2 years passed, and we're finally greeted by the series we know and love today. When Test Drive Unlimited launched in 2006, the game wasn't just another addition to the open-world racing scene. Just a few years ago, Need for Speed had heavily popularized the concept with Underground 2, which features a big city for players to drive and race through. Yet somehow, the folks at Eden Games managed to raise the bar dramatically in just a few years, massively expanding the scope through this game. Their vision to bring a one-to-one map recreation of Oahu, even by today's standard, this achievement stands as one of the most impressive technical feats to be done in gaming history. It offers not just the size, but also the immersion that breaks new boundaries, which paired with the optional MMO features, provides one of the most lively and social driving experiences to be seen. You can visit every dealership to check out your favorite cars, inspect them like you're actually there, drive and take in the beautiful tropical scenes, switch up how you look, collect more houses and garage for your fleet of luxurious vehicles. Now, everything I've described fits the Xbox 360 and PC versions, and it's very likely the version most of you watching are aware of. However, I've come to learn and experience the two alternative ports for this game very recently, and they are equally fascinating in their own right, featuring innovative ways to bend the hardware limitation.
Now here's something important to clarify. These ports were not made by Eden Games. Instead, the responsibilities were handled by Atari Melbourne Studio.
The same studio that had previously developed the Test Drive Le Mans titles for Dreamcast, PS2, and PC, and what they managed to pull off here is honestly fascinating. To circumvent the lower capability of the PS2, the most obvious compromise is the graphics, with way lower resolution and a shorter render distance. Many of the cars still look pretty good despite the downgrade. What's truly impressive though is that the massive scale of Oahu remains intact. You can still drive off-road across nearly every terrain, just like in the main game. The biggest challenge, however, was the MMO side of Test Drive Unlimited. On Xbox 360 and PC, the game was a semi-social experience. You could encounter other players seamlessly while exploring the island, but the PS2 and PSP simply didn't have the same online infrastructure. As a result, these versions strip away features right from the start. No character selection screen, no clothing or customization, no achievement system, and even the handling has been simplified. So how did they make up for it? By doubling down on the single-player progression. Both ports introduce a brand new club mechanic. Think of it like Gran Turismo's classification cups. Each club has strict requirements, whether it's performance tiers, specific car brands, or categories like muscle cars and GT cars. To advance, you climb the ranks by challenging members to one-on-one races. And if you're thinking you could cheese it by cutting across the field, the developers anticipated that, adding a restriction system that punishes off-road shortcuts. The way it's designed is yet another reason for players to explore through the whole map. Some of these club member names can be weird, as if they're emulating real player names, but the thing is, these are real player usernames. Almost every name encountered in the clubs are usernames of contributors to the beta tests, immortalizing their names for their effort in helping the game's development, and I think that's a really cool way for the devs to appreciate their fanbase. Other quirks stand out too. Police are much easier to evade in here, though they linger after events. Car variety is limited compared to the main game, so expect to see repeats across clubs, but the ports balance this by offering plenty of prize cars and introducing master points, earned simply by driving around the island. The PSP version deserves special mention. Despite the handheld's limitation, it retains about 90% of the PS2 content. Same maps, same cars, same houses. Of course, some features are missing, like interior view or the more immersive stuff, for obvious reasons.
If you own something like the Steam Deck, then emulating the PS2 version is probably the best way to experience these ports. But even so, what Atari Melbourne achieved is quite remarkable.
The Xbox 360 and PC versions already pushed boundaries, but these scaled-down ports still capture the essence of Test Drive Unlimited. They proved that even with sacrifices, the vision of Oahu as a living, breathing racing world was strong enough to shine through. Test Drive Unlimited 2 set out to improve on its predecessor, and in many ways it succeeded. For players who wanted more single-player content, it introduced a proper story campaign. For those invested in the MMO side, it expanded features and mechanics. And perhaps most impressively, it added an entirely new map, roughly the same size and density as Oahu, but with its own distinct environments. It gave players another massive playground to explore. The game also brought more cars, each rendered with an insane level of detail. You could literally walk around dealerships and garages, inspecting vehicles up close, even down to specialized digital speedometers. It's clear that developers were passionate about their craft. On top of that, new activities layered onto the existing ones, but it wasn't perfect. The handling changes were divisive, and the story campaign felt cumbersome for players who just wanted to simply drive or experience the online multiplayer. This explains why the community remains fractured when discussing TDU2. Some see it as a clear improvement over the original, while others view it as a downgrade. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. TDU2 doubled down on what the first game did right, while experimenting with new ideas that weren't well received. In essence, it was TDU1 with more content, more features, and more mechanics for better and for worse. Yet for many fans, TDU2 carried a bitter aftertaste. The decision to shut down the servers for the original game, essentially forcing players into the sequel for online play, left a lasting disappointment, and as flawed as TDU2 could feel, it still wasn't as disheartening as what comes next. After years of anticipation, another switch of ownership from Atari to Nikon, a portion of the development team splitting off from Eden Games, and a lot of built-up expectations, Solar Crown finally launched and the result was underwhelming. While updates have improved it over time, the initial release left fans cold. The handling is arguably better than TDU2, and the Hong Kong map, while not as iconic as Oahu or Ibiza, is still solid, but the faction system, promising on paper, turned out to be practically meaningless. Over the time, they've slowly but surely added stuff that are long requested, the taxis and delivery missions that were present in previous games and the casino, to dump all of your hard earnings away. Assuming you're not living in any of these countries. It's not really well done though, at least based on my personal experience. The draw of having a casino as a side content is the rewards. In TDU2, you have to roll the test drive roulette and win to get the Audi R8 Spider, but apparently people want that too much, so they've added extra hurdles to get the car this time. You have to get the triple question mark in the roulette game, which enables the chance to spin the prize wheel. The car in question can only be acquired from the said prize wheel, so you not only have to deal with one, but 2 RNG walls to get the free car. In my attempt to test how the system works, I used an auto clicker for the roulette. Meanwhile, I spent the whole time to beat God of War 1 on the Steam Deck. Very fun game, by the way. In total, it took me around 9 to 10 hours to complete. So you'd think that would be enough to get the car, right? Nah. I never got the car.
Stop it. Get some help.
But the biggest misstep, making the game always online. At launch, this design choice caused major issues, and even now it remains a sore point. The so-called solo mode introduced in Season 3 is little more than racing against AI opponents, with the promise of a true offline mode only when the game reaches the end of its life cycle. To top it all off, the lack of integrity as they introduce a currency shop, despite many promises over the years to never implement such a thing into the game through different posts and putting previously free Solar Pass cars behind a paywall. It's at best another victim of rushed development and mismanagement. With so many technical issues plaguing the game on launch, the choice to release the game without most of the features or mechanics that made previous TDU games stand out, and a lot of jank. At worst, it's just a cash grab, using the name of Test Drive Unlimited to get as much money as possible. You can believe whichever one of these fits with Solar Crown, but I just don't think it's that simple. And Nikon are a bit of a wild card. To my knowledge, they are capable of handling games into becoming amazing solid experiences, or the complete opposite. We may never know the full truth until someone inside decides to talk, but for now I can just simply wish the team good luck on this uphill battle they're facing. But I think a lot of the frustrations here comes from the scope of the projects alone. Solar Crown had many inspirations to look up beyond the previous Unlimited titles. By the time it was announced, we already had a decade of games like Forza Horizon or The Crew, so the botched launch just feels extra sour. Meanwhile, Eden Games stepped in with a bold vision. Instead of chasing trends or experimenting with gimmicks, they redefined what a racing game could be. A massive open world, seamless online integration, and a lifestyle built around exotic cars. It was the reinvention the series desperately needed. Unlimited wasn't just another test drive game, it was the moment the franchise found its identity again. Looking back across this journey, the Test Drive franchise reveals itself as a series defined by cycles. It began as a revolutionary title that pushed boundaries, then slipped into a hiatus, returned by chasing trends, and eventually reinvented itself once more with Unlimited, laying the foundation for the open-world racing genre as we know it today. And yet, history repeated. Another hiatus, another shuffle between owners, and now at Solar Crown, the brand finds itself following trends rather than leading them.
If the cycle is consistent, then perhaps Test Drive will rise once again, not just as a good racing game, but as one of the greatest ever made.
That possibly is what keeps the franchise fascinating. Its legacy is both fragile and enduring, always tethering between innovation and imitation. Of course, not every entry has aged gracefully. Many of the arcade-era titles played it too safe, weighed down by limited content and clunky mechanics. They can feel underwhelming today, but then there are standouts like Le Mans, Brotherhood of Speed, Eve of Destruction, and Wide Open. Games that thrived on solid foundations, memorable stories, and addictive gameplay loops. Even with repetition and rough edges, they offered experiences that were hard to put down.
And that ultimately is the essence of Test Drive. A franchise that has always stumbled and reinvented itself, stumbled again, but always left something worth remembering.
Test Drive's legacy is undeniable. It may not always lead the pack, but when it does, it leaves a mark that lasts for a long time. But with all that said and done, what about you? Have you experienced Test Drive outside of the Unlimited games, and if so, which ones are your favorite? Do you think Solar Crown will have the chance to get a resurgence during or after its lifespan, or will Test Drive survive past this entry? Let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next video.